The bowl season for the Big Ten. Obviously, we've been talking about Michigan and we talked about new Big Ten member Washington, but how'd it go for the other Big Ten teams? Well, Minnesota, Rutgers, who was the other one? Northwestern. They started us off 3-0.
Yep.
Unfortunately, my Buckeyes decided to look like Iowa, who Iowa looked like Iowa. Actually, they didn't. They looked like Iowa on offense. They did not look like Iowa on defense. Let up 35 points to Tennessee in that game. Wisconsin gave LSU a great game, but they still came up short in that one. Ole Miss was able to defeat Penn State, but ultimately Maryland comes up with the blowout to beat Auburn, which was cool to see. Not a lot of people expected that. I actually picked Auburn in that one. So, and the main thing was because of Talia Tagovailoa being out of the game. However, he gave it to him. So, obviously, this would be really easy to say the guys who won the games won and the guys who lost the games lost. But I don't think it's that simple in bowl season, right? You have a lot of backups and stuff like that playing. So, Justin, who are some teams that you felt like kind of came away from bowl season as winners? Maybe they didn't win their games, or maybe they did win their games and they came away with, something positive to look at for their teams.
Well, I had Maryland listed as well for the thing you said, just not only the fact that they won, but the fact and how they won. They did it with, their defense really. One of the players that I wanted to point out, it's somebody who's going to fly under the radar if you're just looking at box scores and stuff like that. But Perry Fisher for Maryland in their game, he had four games, his last 4 games, 6 tackles, no sacks, 0 pass deflections. And in this game, he had 3 solos, 1 sack, 1 TFL, 2 pass deflections. So, guys like that are guys that didn't really, necessarily play a huge factor in the defensive side of the ball during the season, but then they step up big in these bowl games. And, those are the guys that don't get spotlight a lot, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So, Maryland just stayed within themselves and didn't panic the fact that Talia was out. And it seemed like they almost played better as a team overall. And then Rutgers doing what they've done all year, that team has been physical. They've been physical the entire season, and they go in there and they beat a Miami team, without, of course, their quarterback. But that's a team of, high-level talent. Miami recruits 4 or 5-star guys. The talent in Florida is crazy good. And the fact that Rutgers, the small thing, man on the totem pole in the Big Ten, the guys that are at the biggest disadvantage in the Big Ten in terms of NIL and all that stuff. And they go in and they beat, Miami. And the way they did it, it's just they won with Big Ten football physicality and just imposing, what they wanted to do on them. And so Rutgers and Maryland were the 2 teams that stood out the most for me.
Yeah, Rutgers definitely made the Big Ten proud with that one. That was going to be the one that I was going to point out was the biggest winner. And just Greg Schiano, too. Man has not lost a bowl game at Rutgers. Like, that's ridiculous.
Northwestern, too. What a story Northwestern was.
And Northwestern, yeah. We talked a lot about them a couple episodes ago, and David Braun, his story of the season. So, fantastic for them. Derek, who were your winners of the Big Ten bowl season? Other than Michigan, we know them. Okay, give us some others.
Northwestern finishing off their season the way that they did. So bowl season is honestly largely uninteresting. Now it's it for most programs. If you're a big program, you didn't make the college football playoff. Now we're in an era of college football where star players are saying, got better things to do to either get ready for the NFL or got my NIL collection for this year. Now I'm out and I'm going to go to a different school that I actually want to go to. Right. So, it's largely a shell of every team. But the programs that are interesting to watch are those middling programs that do have something to achieve, that are able to take that bowl prep to help create the culture that they're trying to create for their team. And I think that's what makes the story of this entire season for Northwestern a feel good story that come on, it's hard for anyone to dislike Northwestern. Like, what do they do to make you dislike them? Nothing. So it's not like there's a lot of anti Northwestern fans out there. There's a lot of people that genuinely feel good about the success that Northwestern was able to create and that story. So being able to finish it off with a bowl win against Utah, that that's an impressive bowl win. That's a team that was held in high regard in the Pac-12 all year, and to go in and beat them, that's a good win for them. And then Rutgers was the other one that that I thought was a win for the Big Ten. And a big part of that is just because I don't like Miami. I Miami's been, if you want to talk about controversial football programs,
Yeah.
that's one that that's almost like a rallying cry for them. Is yeah, we are. So what?
Right.
But Rutgers beating them shows. I think that it just goes to illustrate a point that I find high value in, and that's that it's better to build a team than buy one. Because Rutgers, give Greg Schiano credit. He's built the best average program in the country.
Yeah, really.
That's what they are. That's where they're at. They're an average program, but they're going to beat the teams that they should beat. They're going to beat other average programs. They're going to hang around with teams that they shouldn't hang around with for longer than it's comfortable for them to be in the game for. That's where they're at right now. And to see them go by a team that was, I mean, anytime somebody commits to Miami, whether it's a transfer or a high school kid, they got bags of money in the pictures that they put out for them. They're putting it out there for them. So I just love seeing that program get beat by a program that built a culture of toughness.
Well, and the other part of it is, and Chris Holtmann talked about this on his interview he did here on the channel a couple of days ago. If you missed it, Chris Holtmann did an interview. It was really cool. Go check it out. But he talked about how, like, oftentimes the media, us, we get into like these comparisons, rankings, and say like, oh, well, this team, they're average, so they're not as good or whatever, and they're kind of off to the side. And he talked about how, like, one of the things that coaches preach to their players is just be the best you can be. Like, yeah, sure, we can look at everybody else and say, yes, this team's go off to the national championship, whatever. Like, be the best you can be. And I have to believe that is just like the message that is permeating throughout Rutgers right now, which is just be the best you can be. Every single game, go out there, give them your best game possible. And, who was the team that gave Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State their best games this season? Maryland, sure. Yeah, Maryland gave them all good games. But other than them, it was Rutgers.
Yep.
I mean, Rutgers and Maryland were the two teams that gave the big three their best games this season. And, if I would have told you that at the beginning of the season, you would have probably believed Maryland, but you wouldn't have believed Rutgers.
Yep.
And so that's really, really cool. Really, really cool for them.
And in both cases, it was their physicality that kept them in the game, but it was the lack of talent that ended up being lack of depth that ended up being the demise. But to your point, just looking at it in the grand scheme of things, and Rutgers, and the opinion of Rutgers, especially even when they came over to the Big Ten, success is very much situational, right? And Rutgers is not in a great location for recruiting. They don't have a crazy NIL. They don't have a crazy fan base. But I mean, I'll use Nebraska, for instance. Like, look at what they've been able to do in the same amount of time that Nebraska has, and that in and of itself right there just shows that Rutgers, in the echelon of just how much better they're doing than what they should be doing. It's a huge success over there. And I don't think it's recognized enough, because you said we tend to focus on the flashy objects and the guys at the top. And a lot of people in college football world outside of the Big Ten just still dismiss Rutgers, and they're going to stop doing that before too long.
Yeah, for sure. You got a fellow GBO.
Hey, what's up? Go Big Red, baby.
Gabriel.
We're still here.
New writers for Big Banter. Glad to have him checking out here. All right, let's go on to the other side of it, which is, the teams that, were disappointments and not impressed. So I'll just go ahead and start with the first one, Ohio State. The offense, Ryan Day, whoever you want to blame it on. That was, probably the worst offensive performance since the Clemson game in 2017, 18? I don't even know. I blanked it out, and I probably blanked this one out too, because that was putrid. to watch. It was gross. And it's got a lot of Ohio State fans not just wanting Ryan Day gone, but I've even heard some Ohio State fans saying strip Brian Hartline of his offensive coordinator job. Because at the end of the day, they're not happy. Losing to Michigan will do that. Losing your bowl game will do that. And not just losing your bowl game, but being embarrassed in your bowl game, not being able to move the ball. So, if I'm going to give myself a biggest disappointment, Ohio State's got to be up there, and not just because of the loss. It is bowl season. I don't think you take losses too bad, but it's kind of how you look. And Ohio State, they did not look good. They changed around their offensive line. It did not do well. Derek, who were your disappointments in the Big Ten bowl season?
So Ohio State is certainly the most glorious disappointment. I'm
sure you had a great night that night too. So,
but seriously, in reality, so Ohio State's not supposed to look like that, right? Even if they have a couple players opt out or not play, there's only 2 other programs in college football that recruit anywhere near the level that Ohio State recruits at, and that's Georgia and Alabama. And so what that team is supposed to look like in a bowl game, all right, so no Kyle McCord, no Marvin Harrison Jr., right?
Fleming.
Okay, so you took your starting quarterback, out, best wide receiver in college football out. All right. All you do is recruit receivers. All you do is recruit quarterbacks. You should have multiple people ready to step up. And another thing that I think should be concerning, and I think is concerning, is what's going on with that culture. What's like, where is the team that's fired up to go and play football? Where's the Rutgers that Justin was just talking about that is going to go in there and outperform their expectations? Because as soon as things started not going Ohio State's way, they didn't find a way to correct them. There was the fight that Urban Meyer teams had when things weren't going Ohio State's way. And granted, Urban Meyer was always good for like a bad loss every year or two. Right? He was.
Michigan
that
State,
happens.
Purdue, Iowa. Yeah, it happened.
Yeah, that happens. But it just seems like the culture of Ohio State is beat down right now, and the coaching staff kind of seems like they're beat down right now. It seems like where there's a couple other programs that we've been talking about that are building teams, it seems like Ohio State's just going after good players right now, and they're not building a team that's all moving in the right direction, and that should be concerning. But it's great to watch from my perspective. And then Iowa, I would say, is another disappointment. I have a lot of respect for Kirk Ferentz and what he has done at Iowa. I don't know that there's another coach in college football that's done more with less consistently. You're a program that develops players for 4 or 5 years all the time. And it's all blue collar, hardworking players that do their job to the best of their ability and are where they're supposed to be. That's what the Iowa program is, and that's not what they look like. And I try to be very careful to respect college players and respect the fact that they're largely 18 to 22-year-old athletes. But I just I've had ringing in the back of my head, Cade McNamara going and saying, please, everybody, keep talking about how shitty we're going to be. Please talk about how shitty we're going to be. And that offense looked awful all year.
Yep.
In fairness, he wasn't there for like half the year. But yes.
Right.
But no, yeah, I get what you're saying. The only pushback I'll give to the Ohio State thing, just because I have to look for some kind of positive, is I think it's there on defense. I think Jim Knowles has put together a good defense, and I think that those guys are fired up, and everybody's going to say, well, they let up 2 scores at the end of the game. Yeah, I'm sure you'd let up 2 scores too if you were carrying the team the entire I mean, there's only so much you can do. And so, which, like you said, Derek, it's concerning for an offensive coach to have an offense that looks like there's no juice. Are you actually evaluating these players? Or does Brian Hartline just get on 24/7 and say, "Oh, this is the number one player, I'll go after him"? Like, no, you should be doing your own evaluations. Like don't just say, "Oh, JJ Smith, he's the number one wide receiver in the country, I'm going to go after him." Make sure you're doing your own evaluations too, and actually figure out, is this guy a good culture fit? Is this guy a good fit for the offense? That kind of stuff. And I've been told there are changes coming to the offensive coaching staff. Now, I've never held my hopes up too high until it actually happens, but that's what I've been told. So we'll see. Justin, who were your disappointments, losers, whatever you want to call them, in the Big Ten bowl season?
Probably to no surprise, they're the same. With Ohio State, I may take, I take a very philosophical, if I can speak, approach to a lot of things. So Ohio State, right? Looking at that game, and I kind of thought this may happen, but again, not to this degree. Ohio State thinks they're one of the 4 best teams in the country. Okay, they were, they lost to Michigan in the game that they absolutely could not lose, and that got Michigan into the playoff. You have, while albeit you do have uber talented team at every spot in the depth chart, but still, with everything else, that team came out flat, but missing those players, and Emeka Egbuka was still there, and losing Drew Brown to the injury. Those things are such a big impact in terms of, not only does the team come in with that mindset of like, oh, like, we don't even want to be here necessarily. Missouri's like ecstatic to be there and ready to just play their tails off. And not only that, you're having these players opt out, before the game, and then all of a sudden you have a quarterback change. I just don't think it could be understated how much those things impact the game. And on the grand scheme of things, for that team that lost one game in the regular season, to go and then call for the head coach to be fired, it gives me vibes of Frank Solich in Nebraska. And that was the ultimate demise of Nebraska, as we fired Frank Solich because, he was winning 9-10 games a year, and it's, everybody gets fire happy, but who you replace him with, first off, and second off, are you ready for that process of churning out those players, for this other guy's players and staff coming in here, and ready to potentially deal with that in a transition year where the Big Ten is about to get a lot tougher? I think you have to think about that. And it's not going to look, it's not going to help them in the first couple of years if they just switch coaches. It's not. And I don't think it's the right thing to do, and the timing of that's terrible. But that's just on the and if you want to touch on that,
The only thing I'll say is, like, typically the most negative voices are always the most prominent ones, right? Those are always, I think all of our fan bases, we all have great fan bases who are wild and have expectations and want to see greatness from their teams. And each of our fan bases, in the last 10 years have seen, highs and lows. And typically on those lows, you see, the most negative, the most disheartened fans of them all. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times on Twitter, people see the most negative fans, and those are the ones who get highlighted the most. Do I think the majority of Ohio State fans want Ryan Day fired? No. At least the rational ones. No.
Yeah.
Do I think the majority of Ohio State fans are saying, hey, let's make sure we have somebody ready just in case? Yeah, because that's kind of where I am. It's like, look, I don't want Ryan Day fired after this season. I think he can tweak a few things, and I think things will get better. Do I think the culture is absolutely terrible? No. Do I think there needs to be a shift in a few areas? Yes. But at the end of the day, if Ryan Day comes out and he goes 8-4 next year, to me, you better have a contingency plan, because that's going to really show that, the things are going downhill, and that is when you have to correct it, because, you can't just let that happen. Especially at a school as large and with as many fans as Ohio State. So I'm not on the fire Ryan Day train at all. I don't think anybody else, not anybody else. I don't think the entire fan base is. I think most people are there like, hey, let's start reaching out to maybe a few other coaches just in case this does go south. So that way we're not stuck in a in a bad place where like we have to fire Ryan Day, but we can't because we don't have anybody else there.
Michigan won in Britta Harbaugh 2 years ago for a very similar circumstance. So, and Iowa, I'll just touch on Iowa real quick. Iowa's terrible. I hate them. I don't like Ferentz. I don't like them at all. So that was beautiful to watch. I typically root for Big Ten, but not when it's Iowa. So my MVP of the bowl season is Tory Taylor, Iowa's punter, 7 punts for 360 yards, 51.4 average. It was really nice of Iowa to let him go out there and put on his own pro day. So good on
And he
Iowa.
broke the record. He broke the record I've been tweeting about. So
good on Iowa for
smashed
doing
it.
that. That's a lot about the culture there. If you're a punter, go to Iowa.
Yeah. Dylan's letting me know we need to send you a Purdue hat. Dylan, I would wear it proudly on the podcast if you send me a Purdue hat. So yes, please do. I wanted one of those Boiler Express hats, but you said that was one of a kind. So, hey, thanks for listening to the Big Ten Huddle. Please do like and subscribe. We appreciate that. If this was your first time listening, we are the Big Ten Huddle. We cover all things Big Ten football and basketball. We have a long episode every Sunday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night, all at 9 o'clock. So come in, check us out, get in the chat, let us know what you're thinking. We would love to have you join us and learn more about the Big Ten.